most of you, I think, have been following our series. It's been a lot of fun. I know I personally have learned quite a bit, and I've actually gotten the chance to teach other people the things that I've learned out of conversation and different instances where other people were kind of like, oh, well, disability doesn't involve equity. I'm like, oh, are you kidding me? It absolutely does. And so it was really a cool opportunity for me to share what I've learned from Darcy and put it into practice. So we're really excited to have her here today, and I'll have Darcy introduce herself because she does just an excellent job of doing that and sharing her story. And then we're going to kick it off with our last and final series with behavior management. So Darcy, all you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me virtually. I was hoping to join you in person, but it's like 8 or 10 hours to where you're at from me. And it's hard as a caregiver of young people with disabilities at home to be gone for very long. So as Leanne mentioned, my name is Darcy Cole, and I work for the University of Minnesota Extension, and I'm going to get my slides up here. You should hopefully be seeing them. My official role with the U of M here is a 4-H program operations educator, and with that, I support the southern half of Minnesota with all the things people tend not to like about their jobs: insurance, finances, risk management, contracts and agreements, all of those type of things, but things that I obviously enjoy. So I do those. I have been with University of Minnesota Extension for just shy of 18 years. 17 of those were in a local county role, and the last year plus a little bit more I've been in this role. For me, this is a passion area where we talk about disability piece, just because I have both that personal and professional connection. I remember seeing early in my career some youth that we'd have at a 4-H program that maybe weren't super engaged with what we were doing, but not always understanding that there was a reason why behind that. And personally, I am a parent to 4 wonderful young people. My oldest 2 both have autism. And my oldest is 14. So I've been kind of on this journey for a little while and been advocating and teaching around this topic here in Minnesota, probably almost since she got her diagnosis. So probably like almost 12 years now here. And as with any disability, we know that that's unique to individuals. So kind of how my family interacts with that is my oldest has high support need autism. She's nonverbal, some of those pieces that and challenges that go with that. And then my second child, he has more of the social awkwardness, the fine motor skills, some of those repetitive type of behavior. So that's kind of a little bit of the background about me and kind of why I do this work and why this is so important to me. I also serve as kind of our contact here in Minnesota for disability work and being that connect between our University of Minnesota Disability Resource Center and our 4-H programs across the state. So, all right. So today, as Leanne mentioned, this is the last of this series, which is kind of crazy to think about because it doesn't seem like that long ago that we were planning all of this. And at that point, it seemed like a super long time until April. So, but today we're going to wrap that up. Some of the things we're going to talk about are going to build on some of the things we've already talked a little bit about in previous sessions. But we're going to explore specifically the purpose of behaviors. And we're going to talk about that as being a form of communication, kind of building on that introduction that we gave to that during our positive behavior interventions, one that we did last month. We're also going to spend some time in breakout groups walking through different behavior scenarios that you might face in your 4-H program role. And through that, we'll share some ideas of how you might handle those behaviors with the hope that by walking through some of them and practicing that you will feel more comfortable having to handle behaviors that happen that are challenging in the moment. So that's what we're going to do today. As I mentioned last time, we really briefly dived into talking about behaviors as being a form of communication. We're going to spend a little bit more time today doing that kind of as a preface to us actually doing those scenario works. So it's really important as we are thinking about behavior and challenging behavior that we might face, that we keep in mind that behavior really is a form of communication. And the reason that it is so important for us to keep that in mind is I think if we have that approach to handling challenging behaviors, we're going to do it in a more empathetic, understanding, positive way than we might do if we're being really reactive in the moment. So it's also important to remember that we can't assume when someone's acting differently or acting in things that we might not expect that it's bad behavior. So so just know that when we talk about behavior, you're going to hear me talking about it as challenging behavior, which is probably a nicer way of just saying problem behavior, right? Sometimes we might think of it as being problem behavior. But as I mentioned, behavior is a form of communication. So everyone's going to communicate through behavior. We do it whether or not we're realizing that we're doing it. When we think about an infant, they're going to cry because they're hungry. Just like as an adult, we might yawn in a training session or a meeting if we're bored with what's being presented. The same is true as we think about a young person with a disability, right? And for them, they may or may not be aware of the behavior that they are presenting and how that's going to be received by those around them. So just know that it's a way for them to tell us what they need. When we think about that purpose behind a problem behavior, we know that it's because they're trying to communicate something. And sometimes we have individuals with disabilities that are not able to verbally communicate to us what they need. So then in those situations, they have to use behavior to communicate to us what they're feeling, what they need, that type of thing. Additionally, even those who can verbally communicate, sometimes they will use quote unquote problem behavior to send an even stronger message because we aren't receiving or acknowledging what they're verbally trying to tell us. So just know that that is much of the problem many times. We also know there can be many reasons behind one behavior. So for example, if you're in an after school setting and you're asking someone to complete a worksheet, if they take that paper, crumple up and throw it on the floor, that could be for a number of different reasons. It might be because handwriting is difficult for them, fine motor things are hard, so they're frustrated, so they don't want to do it. It might be because they're bored and they think that what you're giving them to do is too easy for them, right? Like they're beyond being able to do that. There's, like I said, lots and lots of reasons, right, that someone might do that. So just keep in mind that just because we see a behavior, it's not always for the same reason every time by every individual. We also know that people can learn to understand behavior and then in turn interpret that challenging behavior. And that's really important because if we can try to figure out what someone is communicating to us through their behavior, we can do things and put things in place so that people don't have to use challenging behaviors to communicate. So just know that the more we pick up on that, the less challenging behavior we're going to see because we'll be able to read those signs before it really gets out of hand. And finally, challenging behavior can be reduced with support, not punishment. Sometimes we might want to like take something away or make someone not participate in activity because they're not doing what we want them to do. In short term, like that punishment may stop that behavior that one time. However, long term, those punishments aren't going to help correct behavior or help it from happening in the future again. Instead, if we can provide some supports for people so they know how to better interact, how to find more positive ways to communicate through either verbally or different types of behavior, that's when we're going to be able to see those changes in challenging behavior and that reduction in it. All right, so as I mentioned, we're going to spend a lot of our time today doing some group work because I think it's really important for all of you to actually like think about, talk through some scenarios so that if you experience some things like these, you're going to have a little bit more comfort in handling them on the fly because we know that behavior can be challenging and unexpected. So we can't always plan for everything that we're going to see, but by processing a few things ahead of time, it helps us to do a better job of that. So we break into groups. We're going to talk through 6 different behaviors, and there'll be about 4 of you in a group, 2 to 3 groups per scenario. The first one is about an overnight activity and thinking about food allergies and how that might impact the planning that you do in your menu or your snacks. People don't necessarily always think of food allergies being a disability, but it is a disability. So that's why that's in here as one of these. We're also going to look at a group field trip experience and think a little bit about the physical accessibility for someone who might be a wheelchair user. The third scenario is going to be about county fair exhibit judging here in Minnesota, and I'm sure in North Dakota too. That is one of the most, if not the most overwhelming day that our 4-Hers face throughout the year. They're in a hot, crowded, noisy 4-H building, and having to sit down and somehow focus with a judge on answering questions about their project work. So, so that one's going to be about someone who's experiencing a sensory overload situation. Our fourth scenario is going to be about state fair supervision. So here in Minnesota, we have kids that go to state fair and stay overnight in the dorms there during state fair, with chaperones kind of being responsible for them. So this situation talks a little bit about the issue of elopement or the issue of someone wandering off, and some concerns around self-care, which can be difficult for some young people with disabilities who maybe don't understand some of the social things that a lot of us just automatically do. And one of those might be self-care. The fifth scenario is going to be about an after-school program support. Also could be very applicable to a day camp, a residential camp. And in this situation, we have a 4-Her who, when they're at school, they have a one-on-one para. But when they come to 4-H after school programs, it's just them. There's no support for them. So thinking about how do we navigate that situation. And then our final one here is about food review judging. So here in Minnesota, we have food review. You probably maybe have potentially something similar. So kids plan a menu, they do a place setting, they make that main food item, and they have to talk to a judge about that kind of theme that they pick, the nutrition, all of that kind of piece of it. And in this situation, it's about a young person who has selective mutism, or in other words, isn't able to verbally communicate during conference judging because of the difficulty that they automatically have with that, but also the extra stress that comes with talking to someone you don't know and aren't familiar with in an uncomfortable and new environment potentially. So those would be the scenarios we're going to talk about. When we break into groups, we're going to talk about 4 questions, and you'll have a worksheet that you'll record these pieces on. First thing you're going to do is you're going to want to read that scenario. So the scenario has kind of 2 parts. One is the actual scenario itself. So what is happening? What's the behavior that's being seen? What is the background information that you need to know? Hold on, my light shut off in my office, which is not unusual. You gonna turn on for me? Maybe not. Okay, then I'm gonna open my shades up again. But I shut earlier because it looked like it was being funky there. All right, maybe that will help some. It's still pretty dark, but so yeah, so like I said, so you'll each have a scenario, and then I'll give you all the details, and then there'll be a little bit of information about that disability, so that you have a little bit of background information, because you may or may not know anything about the disability that your scenario is pertaining to. While you're in that group, you're going to talk about why that behavior is happening. So you're going to use some of your detective skills in looking at the scenario and trying to think about, why is this 4-Her acting in this way? You're going to think about, what is that behavior communicating? So why are they doing what they're doing, right? And what are they trying to tell you as a message? You're also going to think about, what would you do in that scenario? So what are some things that you could proactively do to help set this young person up for success? What are some things that you could do in the moment that might help them to be more successful in that environment? And then the last question is really just a place for you to gather any other thoughts that you might have, some things that you might want to share based on experiences that you've had or other learning that you've done. As we're breaking into groups, you're going to want to think about if you've been at some of the other sessions we've talked about, you're going to want to think about some of those positive behavior interventions that we talked about last time. You might want to think about that 4-H accommodation kit and some of the things that were included in there as we talk through that as well. There might be some tools that might be especially useful out of there based on your situation and the disability that the young person has. So that's what we're going to talk about in groups. And when you're in your groups, we're going to, like I said, we'll break into groups. We'll have about 4 people in a group, and we'll do that in just a moment. And there'll be a packet that you'll get of worksheets so that each of you has a worksheet to record on. I want you to divide up into some roles a little bit. If you don't know each other, you probably want to do some introductions so that you know who you are, where you're at, your role, all of that kind of good stuff. Then you're going to want someone read that scenario and those questions as you're discussing. You're going to have somebody that's recording, and then finally you're going to want to identify, because we're going to come back into a large group in a little bit, who that person is going to be that is going to share out your answers to the questions and other information that you think would be important for everyone else to know and see. Before I break into groups, are there any questions on that?
Questions for some of you that may not have been on the previous one with the kits that we're going to give out today before you guys leave. In the behavior management BRKC, in the back of it, Megan and Rochelle brilliantly put in the back the contents that are actually in there. So as Darcy said, if you wanted to use that as a supplement to, as you're thinking through your scenario that Megan handed out, you can use these amazing little things in here.
Yeah, definitely do them. It's a great time to go like touch, feel, check them out, try them out, whatever you want to do. And there might be some things that give you some great ideas of, in this situation, this like fidgets might be useful, or in this situation, maybe a mounted scissors is going to be useful. So think about some of those as we're doing that, because that might help support what you're going to do. So, like I said, we'll come back and we'll have some time that we'll talk about it. So be prepared to summarize or read your scenario. We'll talk through those 4 questions. And we'll have some time for even people outside of your group that didn't talk about it to come up with some ideas if there's things that they feel like they should add. So, as far as groups, are you working like in groups? You're sitting at your tables, or? Okay, perfect. That's perfect then. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, like I said, we'll give you 20 minutes to talk through your scenario, and know that there's going to be 1 to 2 other groups who are doing the same scenario. And I'm going to use a visual timer. So that was one of the pieces that was in your accommodation kits. Yours is like an actual like physical timer that you can use, but I'm going to put one on the screen again to model that best practice, right? So that people can see how much time they have left and all of that. So I'm going to start it if you're ready. And like I said, we'll come back in 20 minutes. We'll talk through your scenarios, share out some of the things that you came up with, and see if we can have some shared learning together around how we can best interact with these situations. All right, with that, I'm going to mute myself. I'm going to start the timer, and you guys can go ahead and do your group work. If you have questions, I will be here. Otherwise, we'll connect shortly.
Perfect. Thanks, Darcy.
Okay, so. No, let's figure. I'm not.
You did not also get a scenario. I thought we were
Scenario. No, like this people didn't get one back. They didn't get one. Here's one. I got one. Oh, yeah.
But I.
Unless I would eat it all at once. I grabbed one of the ones on training.
So how we that like asking what school down very important. They did that. Their district. Yeah. Those guys. Yeah, like when I took that,
I mean, you don't.
She can't tell me. This is something. But then she just learned she has really have more, and I'm feeling good. I have something. This is the kit. So that she can either one like so like that was like yeah, you couldn't be a different way. It's like and she can write that sound. So even that's the use of learning. Well, yeah, it's like just your. They don't know how serious. Oh, like my brother almost died. He was this close. The doctor said next time you're not gonna make it different. But I mean, it was just like, no, no. He even didn't have like. And when he was younger, so he would have been in the hospital. He would have been in the because he can eat. I'm like, that is the weirdest thing I've ever heard. If he gets any.
Some polls say this. Right. And if I have special changes. I'm gonna train you.
Some people very. It might right here. But they don't have the experience. I'm saying, and they're not aware.
One fire. We don't have the plan and have it all figured out. Story. The opportunity. Really never saying. And that's what it's truly like that. Those parents.
Now they're really young. I'd rather have one. And I don't know. So, yeah, I thought just. Like, we have like, well, you're not about that. Yeah. That's like that. Yeah, I feel it's very.
Yeah.
It's great. Better.
They make up that someone was diagnosed. They didn't know. They're fine. If people need to have, yesterday I was at a meeting with them, and one of those staff was going to say that. Pretty often I know information about it. But even if they didn't know that they have it, so I think they now. Like, I'm like,
But then on the we offer, like, we might have really nice meals in the sweat so just more, they're not in like, but you know.
let's try.
And bring your own. Like, I am not your. Tree. Some of it is right. Kind of like sugar free, it's just tough, you like.
Anything.
I don't like to be in there. I haven't been playing, you know. I think I needed to have the. Sometimes they're allergic to both. And permits for input to the DMV. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought, what else? Like,
It's not too straight.
so we were on.
So.
Yeah. I can provide something. I can provide them with like professional. I think. I'm 70. Yeah. I was first. I mean, it's great. I would separation of snacks. Like, sometimes like. Doesn't say maybe it was fine, but now.
You're like, oh, you're so cute. Yeah, that's just really, really.
So your body. With that, happens to free. Yeah.
Line up everything else. That only makes sense. Everything. Talks a lot about how you see hybrids. Yeah. Autistic kids, do you? It's traffic time. You know, just. Usually with the. Fine. Shadow. Like she can't be a show. Right, right. And then they'll. I think they have a sheet. Yeah. Get rid of it. So I have on my list. There's so many different times. You didn't tell me dad and like. Yeah. It's the shape something. She have it from. I just don't even hear. She don't have to fill out. It's so cool. Somebody like a guy who has a big character's amazing, but really. I'm trying to think of a way that. Maybe that's not. Unless she would be. It's in there. It's not exactly. It's good. What? Another much easier. They have a sibling. Yeah, at that point, they get really used to. I think I was actually getting to, which is not being the right thing. You know, and she loved it when her friends tell her. I didn't even think back. Rather than mom or dad, like, but sometimes they like. You have That out. Get on that. Maybe just let them take both ways, like, you're at the same time. Yeah, somebody, I did not, she might have. Generated. Might have read it, like, they're not gonna be missing something, no matter what, yeah. Yeah, that's highly recommended. It would be a map catch, where they here, like, she's gonna have you want to know where it actually knocks and you can point to her. That's all I say. And they like, no, I know. They don't get it. Well, yeah, but. So they still talk and it goes away. It just, it doesn't look like it's like, yeah, it's just, yeah. Like a more to fun. They built so no, we don't like. She write her name. And then they're like, is that all I did? Is write your name on that? Yeah, you're gonna feel the difference. So. And I don't want to be able to like much better than ours. If I have spoken, email that. Gotta be 25, but you see at least 7. So now that 25, she's so there, it's a conversation with the people that are running it, that mom has to tell them who to start. You know what I mean? So I was a field guy, mom stands right behind her, when she got to leave, and that's really. Do you have a fire going on? There's 2000 has the recipe. That's right. All of some. I would start with the teacher. Your guy. And Randy, that was an R. He said, Brett, it just sounded great. What would you do for us?
All right, you're watching the clock. We have about 10 more seconds, so you can wrap up your conversations.
Founding member, so that there's a good program.
All right, I know I heard Leanne kind of tell you to wrap up conversation. If you can work on that, I know I hear lots of good conversation still. So if you need more time, we can take more time. But if you're ready, we'll move on. So you guys tell me, do you need more time to discuss or are you good?
I think we're good.
Okay, perfect, perfect. Yeah, I heard lots of good discussion. I couldn't hear specifically what you were saying, but I could hear lots of chatter. So that's a good thing. All right, so like I mentioned earlier, I used this timer so we could kind of use that visual timer. Tons of those different timers. If you like do a Google search of like visual timer, visual countdown timer, you'll get lots of them, but it's a nice way for all of you to see how much time you had left as you were working through things. And it's a good practice for us to model with the people working in our 4-H programs, because it, again, allows people to know when we're going to wrap up and transition to the next thing, and allows them to be able to stay on task a little bit better. So hopefully that was helpful for you as you were working through. So, all right, then what we're going to do is we'll jump into behavior number 1. And I can, what I'll do is we'll kind of have people share. So there should have been, I think, 2 or 3 groups that did this. Is that correct?
Raise your hand if you have this one.
Yeah, so raise your hand if you have scenario 1.
Perfect, we have 3 groups.
Okay, perfect. All right, I think there should be 3 groups probably of this one and probably 3 groups of the next one, depending upon if you needed to use all of the packets or not. So is there somebody from one of the 3 groups that wants to kind of give, and grant it's on the screen here, people to read, but give like a summary of your scenario and what you think we need to know before we talk about ideas of what we might do.
All right, this really hits home because I have a brother that was severely allergic to peanuts and nuts also. So if there was anything in the room, he would get sent to the hospital, and there were a couple of times he almost didn't make it. So it is scary. So, so the first question, we said that maybe they don't have any experience with food allergies and know what the potential dangers could be, and it could even be death due to air exposure. They don't have to just eat them to have that allergic reaction. And then the second part, you know, they're kind of making it sound like they don't care. Well, they just don't need to eat it. That's not really fair to them. And not being responsible with the child's health, and that's, you know, one of our parts of our clover. So, and then the last part, what would we do? We would probably suggest no nuts at all. I mean, not a suggestion, it would be just no nuts, period. Maybe they could think of some other, brainstorm some other ideas. And then also for any gluten allergies, they could have a gluten option, whether they make it available to everybody or just, you know, have it there for those that would need the gluten option. And then maybe have a learning lesson for organizers about food allergies and how serious they could be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great ideas. And yeah, in this scenario, one of the hard parts is the attitude that comes from those who are organizing it, right? Like you said, they're like, oh, they don't need to eat it, right? Well, actually we want them still to have a snack, right? We don't want those kids to not have the opportunity to eat because we're choosing not to provide a snack that they can eat. So yeah, great ideas that you shared. Are there things that the other groups that had this scenario would add to this?
Okay, but add something.
I love that.
Share your experience.
So I have a whole nother life before joining Extension. I was a retreat cook for 5 years and had some coworkers who had different dietary needs, and then people who attended the retreats. So this is one where it's like, yeah, I've had this kind of thing. And then also we're organizing chef camp at 4-H camp this year, and we're just talking about it last night. So, let's see. And in my experience, you know, sometimes it's older people too, like not to place the burden on, you know, seniors or whatever, but sometimes the attitudes are, there was never peanut allergies. There's not all these allergies when I was young, and so why, you know, or as Emily brought up, having someone who thinks food allergies are woke, which is incorrect. And then sometimes confusing food allergies and like food preferences if you have religious reasons or just aversions that are not technically an allergy, but you know, again, something that we should respect. Some people just don't have that attitude. And let's see. So yeah, again, they're kind of communicating a lack of respect. You know, eat it or leave it, you know, it's kind of, I mean, even at people's dinner tables with your family, sometimes you have parents who are like that, who are eat it or leave it, eat it or go hungry. But that's not necessarily the best way to make you feel welcome and accepted. In this scenario, they already, I guess, have the list of food allergies, but it's good to communicate ahead of time and give contact information for maybe the parents and the families to say, please get in touch with us if you want to discuss this. So like, if you need to tell us that your child is severely allergic to peanuts and cannot have them in the room, chance to give us that, in person and feel heard and, hopefully, you know, feel a little bit more confident that your child's needs to stay alive are going to be heard and respected if you're talking one-on-one to a person and not just filling out a form. And yeah, eliminating things that need to be eliminated. Some of it comes down to, and you can't always, but sometimes if you know things ahead of time, you can strategically plan and just, like from, again, my menu planning days, trying to plan things where either you can, like, it just totally avoids a few allergens, or you have, again, like yesterday's baked potato bar is a great example of, you know, you assemble things on your own. If you can't have dairy, you don't put cheese and sour cream and butter on. But you have that option and you don't have to necessarily draw attention to it. And that's not always the option, but, if you have this information ahead of time and you can make it kind of seamless and not, as big of a deal for the kid as they're going through, as long as they know things. And also yesterday they had stuff marked, which is also helpful as an organizer. You can just, without kind of thinking about it, just have things marked. Or, and then also having labels available if you're gonna do like gluten-free products or products that, some people are pretty, this is going on long, sorry. But like, they'll feel more confident if they can check your label, you know, to make sure, because if you're kind of new to paying attention to allergies, you might not know about, you know, byproducts of wheat or, you know, down the chain that don't go by the name wheat. So you think you're doing great, and then they check and they go, well, but there's malt in this, I'm gonna be pretty uncomfortable, so.
Mhm. No, I think I know you said you're going kind of long, but it's all good information, right? And when I planned out the schedule for today, like there's time for discussion, right? That's intentional. And you shared a lot of really important pieces right there. And I think it's also neat to hear about the experiences that some of you have outside of your role that you now have with 4-H, and being able to bring in like, here's how we did some of those things. So all good information. What about the last group? Anything that you would like to add that you feel like hasn't been covered yet?
They're shaking their head no, so I think we're good. Oh, but we have another comment. No, this is great.
I'm not in that group, but one thing to keep in mind is that if it's a food allergy, there are also things like Play-Doh, for example, could have wheat in it, or like chicken feed could have peanuts in it. So it's our life. My son is airborne and contact reactive as well, and so it's just, those are the kinds of things. And then please don't be offended. That's the thing, like, it's not a personal affront to the people who, you know, if they say, no, I can't eat it. They just can't. You just say, I'm sorry, I tried, you know, or that kind of thing. And it's not a personal attack to people, but there are certain things that some people have to be much stricter than others. So for some people it is just, no, I can't eat that. But others, it has to be like no cross contamination. We can't be digging in the chicken feed, for example, that kind of thing. So just I just wanted to add that it's not always just food, it's, you know, other things as well.
Yeah, and that's a great piece to add. Yeah, there's lots of other things that might be in the environment and to think about too, like when you have those situations that people are maybe bringing their own food. So say you have a day camp, for example, everybody's bringing a bag lunch, or everybody's bringing a snack to share to your meeting, right? To think about like what are those allergies we need to be aware of, and how do we need to make sure that everybody else knows that these are the things that we need to avoid. So yeah, good information. You know, some of the things we need to think about, you know, some great ways to help support this is take a little time, learn about some of the common food allergies and what foods are safe for most people, and then just make it a habit to pick those things, right? Like don't pick things that are going to have a lot of food allergens in them, because you don't know. Like we'd like to think people are always going to let us know when they need something, but we also know people don't always disclose these things or even think about ahead of time. Oh yeah, I need to tell them, right? Like they might just think, oh, it's fine, right? And then again, like,
Comment.
go ahead.
Yep.
I was just gonna say, I love Lynette's idea about doing an educational lesson, like, that would be so cool, like, based on science, like, for instance, the gluten-free, what happens in a system, you know, that's an awesome thing to do.
Mm-hmm. It is, and yes, it definitely is, because then it helps everybody else also gain some learning from that experience. You know, I liked how we talked about, like, don't point someone out, right? So have it be discreet in how they can pick and choose the options that they are going to eat, so that, again, like, no one wants to have attention drawn to them in a situation where it makes them feel like they're an outsider, right? And in this situation, if you can't have the food that people are going to have, you don't want someone to draw attention to that. So, and again, it's really important that we're connecting with that family ahead of time, finding out food allergies, food preferences, and figure out what are safe things for them to have. Because if we don't have to worry about food allergies in our personal life, we might not really be aware of what things, like we talked about the Play-Doh, right? So, like, if you're gluten-free, most Play-Dohs you buy will have gluten products in them, right? Or you talked about, like, the chicken feed, right? All of those things that we might just not even think about because they're not food. Yet they might, you know, if someone doesn't wash their hands, depending upon the severity of their allergy, like, just being in the environment with them might be too much. So, so again, like, lots of good feedback and comments that came in this. So thank you for sharing. If there's anything else with that, and we'll go on to the next one, which is a group field trip. And I think there's probably 3 groups of this again. Is that correct?
Raise your hand if this is your scenario. So we have one.
Just one. Okay. All right. So then we just have one of this one. So I'll let you give a little bit of a summary of your scenario, and then we'll talk through the questions, and then, you know, open it up for any other comments that others outside of your group might have too, based on this scenario.
Okay, so our group scenario was that they're going to a sports stadium. One of the participants brought a friend with a physical disability who uses a wheelchair. And they planned a photo session at the top of the steps. The chosen route includes several flights of stairs, and so they elected to leave the participant with another chaperone outside while they finished the tour. Okay, so we said for the first one, why is this behavior happening? But we talked about how the group leader might just be unaware, not really wanting to accommodate the change, resistance to change. They're just taking kind of the easy route because it's easier for them to handle the group. But also, after we talked about it more, you know, there's probably a lack of communication here, lack of planning, could easily be avoided. It sounds like this was the chosen route. So if they made plans in advance, they could figure out how they're going to adjust with this. And then we said this behavior was communicating basically to that participant that if you have a disability, while you're out of luck, you're not going to get to do what the rest are doing. It could make them feel unimportant, not included. And so we said in this scenario, what we could do is explain how this behavior isn't being inclusive and direct back to our adult behavioral expectations and how that's kind of the environment that we're trying to make is a fair environment for all the youth to participate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like how you drew it back to those behavior expectations, right? Because it is like by not planning activities and leaving someone out, right, intentionally in this situation, you aren't following those expectations that you have of those who are helping in your program. So great. Other things that your group wants to share, or other groups?
I'm gonna talk over you. So it wasn't clear in this scenario whether there was an actual accommodation request.
Mm-hmm.
So we still feel the leader chose the easy way, but she may not have known, or he may not have known. So it was we agreed it was a bad look for 4-H and maybe exclusive of non-members. And possible things you could do is ask the facilities manager for an option. We discussed that since it was a public stadium, they probably did have a plan for accommodations, and as long if you knew about them when you got there, you could make a plan. It's always good to have a backup plan and be prepared. And having come from a Boy Scout background, you cannot leave youth one youth, one leader. It's just not safe for either of them. You could take, we talked about taking 2 pictures instead of 1. And, other thoughts, I went to the scrapbooking thing in Lakota, and we were very quietly prepared ahead of time to work with a youth that had hearing issues. We were told how to deal with her accommodation. And it was really nice to know and nice to be able to think how we handle it ahead of time and not make a big deal out of it either. And with the food thing, I have food issues. And it's just really, I never thought of them as accommodations, but it's really hard to concentrate when you're hungry. And it's also hard to concentrate when you're sick because you ate something that didn't agree with you. It's nice to feel appreciated if someone actually asks, just someone asking, even if it doesn't work out, because there's miscommunication with whoever plans the food. It's just nice to be asked.
Thanks for sharing that. Anybody else? Do you have one more? No? Yeah?
I just had a comment. Okay, so I'm just gonna throw this in here while I'm thinking about it, but you mentioned hearing impaired. And so I have a couple that aren't in my family that are, they're both legally deaf and their daughters do sign for them. But we worked really hard to get a translator into ASL at events, but she and her family came to a gardening event that we had. And she said, I knew there wasn't enough time to schedule that person's travel. But so there are apps available now that will translate into American Sign Language. It is a translator that's live there on the app translating, and there is a fee associated with it. But I said I would be more than willing to pay that app if there isn't lead time, pay for that app use, because it's a permanent charge. So just so you know that those exist, like because sometimes we are in a pitch. So sharing it with you, so. Really good.
Think anybody else have any comments? All right, off to you, Darcy.
All right, Ellen, as I said, great ideas, right? Some of the things you talked about is identifying a new place for a photo. You talked about maybe taking 2 photos. I think that's an important part because we don't want to leave young people out. I'm not sure what like your university's safety of minors policy is, but like here in Minnesota, we can never have 1 youth, 1 adult alone, right? We always have to have 2 adults and 2 youth, or 2 adults and a youth, or 2 youth and adult kind of thing. So yeah, like never leaving that person alone. Thinking about, and you talked about it earlier, like talking to that facility manager ahead of time. They probably have some elevators or other things that can make this potentially accessible for someone. So like being proactive, assuming that you knew about this ahead of time, right? Also thinking about not just the elevators, but like where are accessible bathrooms? So if this person needs to use the bathroom on the tour, like where can you direct them to do that? Because they have needs just like everyone else. Or if this facility truly is inaccessible, it's really about considering other alternative tour locations then, because this isn't the right place for you if you have someone who needs to have their physical accessibility taken into account. So yeah, great comments on that one. And we'll go to the next one. This one's about county fair exhibit judging. How many groups have this one? Raise your hand. Okay, wonderful. So I'll let you guys take it away, tell us about your scenario and how you would answer the questions.
All right, thanks, Darcy.
Which group wants to start us off?
I guess I'll start it that way. So this actually is something that we deal with up here in Bottle County. We have a couple of nonverbal sensory processing disorder youth that we do. So we do we work with the parents and stuff on coordinating our county fair because we do static exhibit interview judging. We do have a office space in our exhibit hall that we have accommodated them into that space. And if it gets too overwhelming, we have another location on the fairgrounds that we utilize for their judging space. But we've had a lot of education that goes along with utilizing those facilities because there's people like, why do they get special treatment? and that kind of thing. And so I do have an education background, so I've worked with a lot of different educational psychologies and things like that, so it's not second nature for me. And so we've done a lot of different things to accommodate for those youth. We've also, and Angie mentioned here too, that, you know, doing your interviews via like a Zoom call or so they're in their own home or their own space, can help deal with those things. We both have family members that are also in this group, and we worked with them on a personal basis. So it can be a lot. It really depends on what their sensory process function is. Like what is it? Is it smells? Is it sounds? Is it sights? Is it all of them? You know, making it very, very specific to that youth. We also have the ability to do what we call absentee judging, so they can fill out, or their parents can help fill out a form that they can present to the judge, so they don't have to actually physically sit there with the judge. And so we have a lot of different pieces in play depending on what we need to do for their accommodation.
Can I ask Sarah a question real quick? Sarah, when you have that absentee, ours is written in that you cannot advance to state fair because you weren't there. So
We don't have it, we do allow them to still participate in the state fair. We just have it so where, and that can be accommodated as well. They're just not eligible for the Grand Reserve designation at the county level.
yeah, okay, thank you.
But if they do the interview judge in person with the accommodations that we supply, they will be eligible.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a key point, right? You talked about people giving you pushback when maybe someone is getting to do their judging in a different location, right? Feeling there's preferential treatment. And that's where as staff, we need to be prepared to be able to communicate that it's not preferential treatment. They're not getting an advantage or a leg up on you, right? It's about trying to level the playing field. And accommodations are really about making things as equitable as possible, not about providing an advantage for someone. So know that when you do provide accommodations, you may have people that feel like that gives that young person an advantage over their own child. And we know that people can get rather heated when it comes to some of those things. So I think be prepared for that because you may at some point experience that. So thanks for pointing that out. Other groups, things you'd like to add.
We have one more, Darcy, and I'm gonna comment just a little bit on that. Is again, we have to remember the mission of 4-H, and anytime we exclude somebody because of a disability, we're drawing that barrier. And so just to say that because you filled out this form and you weren't physically there, you can't go on to the state, you're denying that youth a potential opportunity to grow in some way. And so I would really caution against that and allow them that opportunity. And then we come back to what Sarah was talking, and then we have to educate, you know, why are we allowing this? Why are we making sure that we're giving them the opportunity to advance, just like we're giving everybody else the opportunity to advance?
Mhm.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
So this was done 55 years ago, right?
I'm gonna put this on because for the recording purposes, just FYI.
So originally, the intent was that it meets the same time as baseball, so those boys would fill out the absentee and then not come and vote. But when Sarah brought it up, I thought, what an awesome opportunity for someone who has sensory overload, and that's too much for him. So in that case, I'm gonna need to talk to you about how you would define that then, because you're making the choice not to come, or you have an accommodation we need to meet. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's two very different things, right? And we have an absentee judging kind of policy here in Minnesota too. And we do allow for the with disabilities to do absentee judging if that's the best fit for them. And like Leanne said, there's no consequence, right? Like they can still go on to state fair. They could still be your champion in your class if they earn that right. Like we award that right. Because it's not that they're choosing, right? They're not choosing to pick another activity over 4-H judging. They just physically can't be there because it's going to be too overwhelming. It's not going to be a successful experience. And we want our 4-Hers to have whatever experience with 4-H that they can. And we want it to always be positive. So I think, yes, think about the reason that you might want to withhold something. And, you know, is it around like they're choosing not to be there, or is it around we're doing absentee judging to be equitable? Yeah, good comments, good comments. Other things people would share.
I would probably echo what Sarah said, for their accommodations and whatnot, but if you're not from an education background, it's not necessarily a bad thing to ask what the accommodations are in school that are successful so that you can replicate them and anticipate similar success. Or, it gives you an opportunity to learn or do some more research on what other supports might be helpful if we can't use the same supports as they have in school.
Mhm. Yeah, and we talked about that earlier, like, those parents are going to be the best expert on their young person. So make sure that you're asking them what they do. On our site here for our volunteers, we also have a social story about County for Entry Day, because this is an overwhelming day. So think about how can you help this family prepare for judging whether or not they're in that 4-H building or not. Because there's things that someone that maybe has a disability that impacts them, some of their social skills, they're not going to understand the nuances of county fair judging or the environment. So we need to help prepare them the best that we can to be successful.
Hey, to add a little bit more to kind of complete what Katie was saying too, we've utilized their paraprofessional or their teacher as their judge, because sometimes it's the comfort level. And so I work closely with our schools in our county, so I kind of know the kids, I know the teachers that they work with. And just kind of asking, comfort level too, because if you have a nonverbal autistic student, they aren't gonna open up to just anybody. And so they might be comfortable with that one person talking about their one thing with their one person. And so that's always an option as well.
Mhm.
I was just gonna add, like Sarah said, we both, and I'm sure everyone in this room knows of somebody in their life that has a sensory processing disorder. And just looking at this scenario, this would be a great role-playing activity for your leaders council, because as Katie said, unless you lived through this or have gone through this, you're honestly not just ignorant, you just honestly don't know. And so if you can work with your leaders council going through this scenario, maybe that helps them understand, let's put a plan together. So not if this happens, when this happens, so we're ready to work with that family instead of ostracizing and looking at the back end. And then you have your council that's supporting you when you do have parents that might be upset saying so-and-so had an unfair advantage or whatever. You have a team instead of just you as the agent advocating for that child.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I'm going to share with you at the end, there's 2 different sets of scenarios I have as part of the activity. One is, one that I would say is more for staff and like county level volunteers. And then there's another version that really is based on club experiences. So I would recommend that you share these. Maybe you do that at some of your county meetings, encourage clubs to do them too, because it's good for them to think about how they can be more inclusive. And by just thinking about the scenarios, it opens up your mind to some of the things you might not have thought about that might be barriers in your settings.
We have one more comment on this one.
Actually, it was a general comment on all 3 of them.
Oh, there you go.
No, just any and all of these scenarios, having the adults in the rooms, role play through them. Because unless you have actually thought about a disability, about accommodations, you're gonna be floored and you're gonna have no idea what to do. With the wheelchair, most public locations have wheelchair ramps. Yeah, the kid already is acceptable, already knows that he's not gonna be able to climb the stairs. But getting to tour that anyways, with the friends, where he can go, and getting to see the awesome bigness and the history of it, all you need is a microphone, so that the kid can hear and still watch his friends. There was really no, just change the location of the picture, and you're good.
Awesome.
All right, back to you, Darcy.
All right. So yeah, some things that, to highlight in this one, think about maybe the 4-H'er can come early before the building gets chaotic, or at another separate time. It might be your absentee judging. It might be a virtual judging experience. It might be about doing judging at the same time, but in a different space, if that works for them. Using noise canceling headphones, lots of different things that we can do. But the key piece again is like, utilize those parents. They're the best expert on their young person, and they're going to be able to tell you what is going to help them be successful based on what they do at home, what they do at school. And whenever we can replicate that, the better, because that consistency is really important for a lot of our people with disabilities. All right, next scenario is about state fair supervision. I'll let you guys take it from there. How many groups have this one?
One.
Okay, perfect, go for it.
Okay, our scenario was that they had previously went to the state fair and they were signing up, a youth had signed up for the state fair this time and they had safety concerns with the youth wandering off. And not being with the rest of the group, and then they also had some concerns about self-care and hygiene. And so why the behavior is happening, maybe he doesn't feel comfortable in the group, maybe he's not interested in the activities that are going on. Maybe he's wandering off because he's being bullied because of his lack of self-care. And then we kind of touched on the self-care that maybe he doesn't have access to it, or family doesn't believe in it, or he's never been taught it, so just what behaviors, or what is the behavior communicating? I don't want to, or I'm not aware, I need to stay with my group. Maybe the new environment is like too overloading and it's stimulating too much. What do you do in this scenario? Reach out to the family or club leaders or volunteers that noticed this last year to see like what can be changed, set clear expectations. Finding a safe person for that person, maybe they don't feel comfortable with everybody else, so maybe they have a person that they can go to, or like, if they're in a high stimulating environment, having some kind of like sign that they need to be taken out of that environment. Making like a travel like hygiene kit so that they have it available if they want to use it. Using the buddy system, or maybe he brings a friend that he's comfortable with so that he has a partner. Making sure everybody has like a bag or lanyard or shirt so they are easy to identify. And then just make the communication is always there, and you might have to initiate it yourself.
Really good.
Great.
sense.
Other things that you want to add or that others in the room would like to add?
I am not seeing any, Darcy, back to you.
Yeah, like I said, I think you hit a lot of great things. You talked about like the reasoning behind it, right? It might be they're not comfortable, they might not understand the hygiene or the like staying with groups. So I think, you know, helping to do that education is a really key piece. So wonderful, wonderful. All right, next one up then is after school program support. And how many groups do we have with this one?
Just one?
All right, go for it.
So this scenario is about a youth with autism that the youth could not do any of the activities planned, and they were disruptive to the other attendees, but this youth needs constant redirection and support, and during the school day, they do have a pair with them at all times. That's the situation. So it says, why is this behavior happening? And it's just, we don't believe there's really a reason, it's just the autism and disability. What is the behavior communicating that this child needs help and redirection and support? What would you do in this scenario? We need to take steps to secure some help, to look into funding for help, or it's after school program. So if there can be, the school can, if it's a situation where a school can provide the para help, or ask the family perhaps for help. And then our other thoughts were, no, this is a tough one to what extent can we accommodate? So is there a time where we say what accommodations we are equipped to provide, and what's the definition of reasonable?
Great question.
We also had this.
We have one more table over here, heading over there now.
Our group had a lot of the same answers to the question. One of the things we talked a little bit about at our table was mom, it was shared that mom hasn't necessarily come forward and asked if any accommodations or provided additional information. And I've had the opportunity to work through this situation dealing with livestock quite a few times. And a lot of the times I found that if you don't have, or if you haven't extended a relationship with the parents, they're a lot less likely to be forthcoming. I'm sure no parent wants the first thing they tell you when their child joins a program of, we're gonna need 10 accommodations, and these are all the things that make my child different than all the other kids in your program. And so making sure that you connect with those parents so that they can begin to learn, like, I am looking out for your child, I want them to have the best possible experience, so that they feel comfortable opening up to you and telling you, this is what you can expect, or he will do these 3 things I've noticed when frustrated or when bored. To try to get some help, because it is frustrating as a staff member if you don't know how to help. And usually really the parents are the ones that can tell you what you can do to help or make that situation better. But that takes a lot of building and relationships on the backside of those parents.
Absolutely. I think you got a key piece, right? That somebody, like, families have different comfort with disclosing, right? Some are going to be really forthcoming with, here's what my child needs. Others, they don't want it to feel like a burden. So they're not going to tell you all the stuff they need necessarily, or want to tell you that right away. So yeah, develop those relationships. It's important with all of our families, but especially important with our families of young people that have a disability, because we want them to trust us. They want us to tell us what we can do to help their young person be successful.
Darcy, in this situation where it's an after-school program, you know you're gonna see him again, would it be wrong when the mom comes to pick him up to just ask those questions?
Yeah,
I know building a relationship part, but that may not be an option if it's just an after-school program. So being outright with it and asking is okay?
It is, absolutely. And most families, they're going to be glad that you asked, because that shows automatically that you care enough to actually try to make efforts to make it a positive experience for their child, right? So they're not going to be offended. Like, they're going to be glad that you asked to do that. I'm not going to say there's not going to be an outlier that's not going to be like, well, what do you mean my kid needs something special, or my kid is like isn't doing what everybody else is doing? But for the most part, people are going to be happy that you asked and that you care enough to help support the young person's success. So definitely ask those questions. If you have relationships with school staff, you could ask that school staff about what things they do. You could see if potentially there's something that could be in that young person's IEP or that individualized education plan for some para support in after school programs. So yeah, just have those conversations with the family, like I said, with the school staff, depending upon what relationship you have with them. That can be another really important person to tap into. Other things that you guys would like to share about this situation?
I think we're good to go.
Okay, I mean, think about some of those things we've talked about in other sessions, like using those visual schedules might be really important for this person because it helps them to understand what's going to happen. Maybe there's another young person or a volunteer who could be there to help support them. So think about that. It might be asking the parent to provide some support there, because you hit that question of what's a reasonable accommodation. Here in Minnesota, like, we don't provide like a para or a PCA for a young person if they want to attend a 4-H program. That's a family responsibility. However, we do have funding to be able to pay for costs that are associated with that assistant being there. So like if it's a residential camp, for example, we would cover like the registration costs, the housing, the meals, all of those pieces for that personal care assistant. We just can't provide that person. And we don't want to either, because we want to have it be someone who that young person has a relationship with, and someone who knows how to best support that young person, because we're not necessarily going to know that. And if we bring in some random person, they're not going to know that either. So think about, again, like using those visuals, having that conversation, which can be hard with the family, of getting someone there to help support this young person, because they've got a one-on-one pair at school. They need somebody to help them at an after school program too. Like, they can't just come to a program with 20 other kids, because you're not going to be able to support that. And that's reality. Like, you just won't be able to in the environment that you have and in the capacity that you have as one person and a volunteer that's helping, or whatever that looks like. So keep that in mind too. All right, then our next scenario is about food review judging. So if you want to share a little bit, I don't know how many groups have this one, but if you want to share a little bit about your scenario.
All right, on my way to the table.
Sharon. So this was kind of two parts. Basically, this child gets really anxious when she's in these new situations and just can't speak. She still understands everything. She knows what's going on. So part of the problem is that she feels extremely uncomfortable in these situations. But then part B is that her mom is stepping in and answering questions for her. And so part A, I mean, it's important to make her feel comfortable, so maybe if the judge was someone she was comfortable with, or if it was a Zoom option, et cetera. And B, either having a different person that she's comfortable with in the room to make sure that this child actually gets the chance to do the project rather than her mom. Or B, talking to the mom about, hey, you know you can do this. You are not being judged today. We'd love to hear what she's saying, so.
Really, really good. Anybody else have this one that wanted to share or any other comments? Oh, got one over here. I'm my lady.
My comment in starting this one was something that happened at the first session that we had this training. And one of the things they shared to me that really stuck was making sure that every club leader is giving an opportunity at the beginning of the year for those families to disclose in a confidential way, so that some of this could have possibly been avoided. I thought that was a really key component of this whole process. And then just confirming with the mom with what those accommodations were, because it sounds like the mom has maybe not been approached or for whatever reason. So that also needs to be the first step, because we always have to consider respect is primary. And we have to be very respectful of where this family is at. And if this family chooses not to disclose, that could be one of their options. We go from there. But then we just said, then we would find what the accommodations have been at this point, and what would be reasonable would be, like you said, possibly a Zoom opportunity or doing the absentee interview form, which already exists in the county, is not an issue.
Really
Yeah.
good. Anybody else? All right, back to you, Darcy.
All right, then some things to think about is, can you potentially ask if she could answer the questions beforehand? So could she respond in writing? Maybe she records herself at home in a comfortable environment, and she could bring that video to judging and use that as kind of a support. And that way she could explain through that video, typical questions we might answer or show us the parts of her project. I think it's also important to accept nonverbal communication. So head nods and shakes are maybe okay, even though that judge might think that they need to hear something verbally. It also might mean, like, rather than answering really open-ended questions, which we tend to do, like, tell me about your project, right? It might be using more like forced choice type of answers. So things that are yes or no, like an agree, disagree type of thing, so that it's easier for them to come up with words. Again, like using written words, visuals, maybe they can point to things on a board or in a book versus having to like verbally tell about that. And then again, just think about what are the alternative ways that this person can communicate, because they are fully competent to do their project work. They just struggle in being able to communicate that. So we need to be respectful of that too. And, finding ways for that young person to feel empowered versus their mom feeling empowered to answer for them. So, which we know happens for young people with disabilities and without disabilities, right? I'm sure we've all seen where a parent steps in and answers questions during judging. So very good. All right. So that gets us through our scenarios. So if we had more time, we would probably talk through these questions, but this is more like for you to think about, right? So as we're processing this activity, think about how could you help other people better understand the behaviors that we talked about. And I know we heard some great ideas around like doing some scenarios or some role play with your county leader or your county leadership meetings or with your clubs, right? So think about how can you help others to better understand behaviors and how we can better accommodate those things. Think about how you could help others better interact with 4-Hers in scenarios that are similar. Think about, like, you as a 4-H professional, how can you better interact with some of these 4-Hers? And then finally, think about how does understanding why behaviors happen improve the way that you feel about behaviors? I think most of us probably would agree that we think about behavior as being a form of communication and thinking about the why behind the behavior. We maybe don't interact as strictly with that behavior, or we are more flexible and or more understanding. So we really want to make sure that our volunteers also like the learning doesn't end with us, right? We need to be able to take this out into our 4-H programs and make sure that all levels of our 4-H program are going to be more accommodating for people with disabilities. So think about those things. Some ways that you can learn a little bit more if this is super exciting for you. And we have our Minnesota 4-H volunteer resource site, which you'll find a lot of the great resources that we've shared throughout this training series. There's also a link to this activity. We have an activity guide that walks you through how to interact with and how to lead this entire activity. So I'll show you that here in a little bit. The Center for or the CDC there, you can see they've got some disability health overview information. So it's a great way to learn just a little bit about general information about pretty much any type of disability. It's always good too to think about positive behavior supports as we're talking about how we're going to help a young person in a situation. So there's some resources there too of things that you might want to check out a little bit on your own as well. So how can you use this with your groups? We talked a little bit about this earlier. Again, like talk through some of the shared scenarios that are part of our activity guides. As I mentioned, there's one version that is more designed for staff and county level volunteers because the activities that they're going to talk through are a little bit different. And then there's one that's more for club scenarios. So there's some of the things that those club leaders, other families in a club are going to experience on a regular basis potentially. Another way to think about this is you could potentially come up with your own scenarios and use those same series of questions to think about, you know, what that behavior is, why it's happening, what it's communicating, and then how we can better support that. And it could be real life scenarios, or it could be other kind of generic scenarios that you think you might experience. You could also use this structure to talk with youth, volunteers, parents, committees, whoever that might be, about behaviors that maybe you've seen in your group or you've seen elsewhere, as just, again, a way to help people become more comfortable in navigating challenging behaviors that they might face. All right, I'm going to stop sharing this for a little bit and show you. So this is our volunteer resource center. On there, you can see all the things we've talked about earlier. There's disability etiquette, there's the accommodation request form, the information sheet that goes with our accommodations kit and talks about what's in there, mentor guide, there's some judging tips, facility accessibility checklist, all of the things that we've talked about, visual support, social stories, whatever. All those things we talked about as part of this 5-step series. There's also these activity plans. So these are lesson plans. I think there's 14 of them that we've developed for use to help people gain more comfort, understanding in disability work. There's 2 of those that relate directly to what we did today. So when you're on the search page, if you click including youth of all abilities and apply it, you'll see the 14 lessons. There's a couple pages of those. One of those, like I said, is the one we did today. So this is the club version. So there's a situation about a youth with ADHD who's having trouble paying attention. There's a youth with Down syndrome, a different one with autism around some alternative communication methods, one around some reading difficulties, the more food allergy things, and some wheelchair accessibility. And then in those ones that are more for staff or county level volunteers, state level volunteers, there's some of them that we did today. There's also one about dog training. There's one about project workshop and needing one-on-one support. There's one about conference judging and helping judges to learn how to interact better with the young person that is tending to give really short yes/no answers. So there's a lot of different scenarios here you can see. In these activity plans, like I said, it gives you all of the information you need to know to lead these. One of the cool things too is, like I said, there's worksheets like you had in here, but there's also strategies and support ideas for each one of the scenarios listed so that you don't have to come up with what these ideas are, right? They're provided for you. So you can use it as a tool that you don't have to be an expert in to be able to facilitate this activity. So no, those are available to you as well. All right, so as we are hitting 1 o'clock, essentially, want to have an opportunity for questions, but I also would like to have a little bit of feedback from all of you too on how things went today. I'd love to hear a little bit about one thing that you thought was maybe most valuable about today. And that might be a specific strategy, or it might just be the experience itself. And then how you think you might use this in your work. And while we're doing that, and I know we have like a minute or two, if you also can either use that QR code or type that link in on your phone or computer, I'd love to get a little bit of feedback from all of you about how today's training went, and that allows me to continue to do a better job with that and continue to improve my teaching and to make sure that this activity meets the needs of those who are participating in it. But with that, like I said, I'd love to hear from some of you a little bit around what you found most valuable, how you think you might use something similar like this in your 4-H program work.
Darcy, this is Danielle Dinger. You and I have emailed back and forth about a visually impaired. One thing I never thought of until just now when you were talking was her mom has reached out about making accommodations for fair. But she's also in my club and we've planned most visual activities. So how would a person go about like, say a tour or the gum cleaning or the craft making or any of those she's not able to participate in? So what would be the right route to take with that for the club level?
Yeah, I mean, part of that might be having a conversation with the family about like, here's the things that we have planned, and trying to work out with the family of, are there ways that this young person can still participate in those activities? Like if there's a support person that helps them, can they do some of those things? Or talking with them too about like, what are some alternative activities that your child really enjoys, really finds success in, and then how can we better incorporate those into our club calendar, right? So, so as we're planning those activities, thinking about, okay, this 4-H'er really enjoys this or really good at this, right? Then maybe that's an activity that we should plan for all of our 4-H'ers to do together. So that way they can still all participate as a group. You know, that family, that parent probably realizes that there are going to be some things that their child may not be able to do, right? And they probably don't expect that you're changing every activity that your club is doing because of their child specifically, right? But I think it's reaching out to them and saying, we've got this plan. How can we help your child participate? Is there something else that they can do, right? Is there a different way that they can do this? Or again, asking what are those things that they find success in and how can we do that as part of our group? And I think just having that awareness is really important, because the more we know, the better we can do, right? So going forward, that means taking into consideration this young person's needs when the club is planning the calendar for the year and what they're going to do.
Perfect. Thank you, Darcy. Any other questions for Darcy while she's here? Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Darcy. I sure appreciate all that I've learned from you. And this has been a great opportunity just to even learn from my peers here in this room. And so that, you know, we're all work through really neat opportunities to serve our youth. And so it's a pretty cool learning experience for all of us. So thank you, Darcy.
Yeah, thank you. And as we have kind of mentioned earlier in some of the stuff, we'll be sending you an evaluation form for the whole series, as well as an opportunity to tell us which sessions you've participated in, either in person, like live with us, or if you've watched recordings, so that we can get you some like educational certificates too, showing that you've taken part in this training. So, all right, enjoy the rest of your conference. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Darcy. So I will send the recording to her once it is finalized, along with, she will also send several links like she always does, and that will be located in our staff resource folder in the differently abled ones. I also just wanted to remind you guys, I did pass out these really neat kits that Darcy put together for us. I think they cost around, what is it, Darcy, $250?
Yeah, somewhere on there, and you can do them more expensive or cheaper depending on what you choose to put in.
Yeah, so we've got one in 3 across the top of the state. So one's going to Tracy, but Grand Forks, Ward, and Montreal. And then across the bottom of the state, we've got Stark, Billings, Burley, and then Cass. So if you guys need to borrow them, please share, or we can help you create and build one. With that, I'm gonna hand it over to Megan. Thanks again, Darcy.
Yeah, thank you. Enjoy.
Thanks, Darcy.
All right, well, that